It was a typical morning at Heathrow Airport, crowds everywhere, suitcases rolling across the floors, and stressed-out passengers checking their watches. The check-in line stretched far, with people sighing impatiently as they waited for their turn. Among them stood a young girl. She was dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. Just a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. She clutched her small carry-on bag and waited her turn. When she finally reached the counter, the airline staff barely glanced at her. "Passport?" one of them asked, sounding tired. The girl reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. But instead of a passport, it contained a neatly folded piece of paper. She slid it across the counter with a polite smile. The woman behind the desk barely glanced at it before frowning. "Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated. "I'm traveling alone." That was mistake number one. The staff exchanged looks. The woman picked up the paper and read it quickly. It was a formal travel authorization, signed with an official-looking crest at the top. But she wasn't impressed. "Where's your ID?" she asked again, this time sharper. "I don't have it with me," the girl admitted. "But I promise, I'm sorry," the woman cut in, shaking her head. "We can't let an unaccompanied minor board a flight without proper identification." The girl's smile faded. "But my father arranged everything." "Then he should have sent you with a passport," the woman said, sighing. "Look, we have rules. We can't make exceptions just because you say so." At that moment, another employee walked over. "Is there a problem?" "This girl is trying to board without proper ID," the first woman explained, rolling her eyes. "Not happening," the second employee said immediately. He turned to the girl. "You need to step aside, miss." Now people in the line were staring. The girl took a deep breath. "Please, just call." "Step aside," the man repeated, already waving for the next passenger. With no choice, the girl picked up her bag and moved out of the way. She didn't argue. She didn't cause a scene. She just stood there, looking lost. And that was mistake number two. Because they had just kicked out Princess Charlotte of Wales. For a few minutes, Charlotte just stood there, unsure of what to do. Her father, Prince William, had arranged this trip carefully. He wanted his daughter to experience a bit of independence, just like he and his brother Prince Harry had when they were younger. Of course, security was nearby, but they had orders to keep their distance unless necessary. Charlotte had trusted that everything would go smoothly. After all, she wasn't an ordinary traveler. She was third in line to the British throne. But the airline staff didn't recognize her. They didn't connect the simple outfit to the little princess they had seen on TV. And since Charlotte was raised to be polite and humble, she hadn't pulled out the royal card immediately. And now, she was stranded. She glanced around the busy airport, watching travelers rush past her, oblivious to her situation. The thought of arguing crossed her mind, but she pushed it away. That wasn't how she had been raised. Instead, she exhaled slowly and tried to think. Should she wait? Should she call her father? She didn't want to cause trouble, but at this point, she had no choice. She tried once more, this time asking for a supervisor, but the response was the same. No ID, no flight. Frustrated, she stepped aside and pulled out her phone. She hesitated for a second before dialing. On the other end of the call, silence followed her explanation. Then, a calm but firm voice said, "Stay where you are. We'll handle this." Charlotte knew what that meant. The situation had officially escalated. 30 minutes later, things were about to get very interesting. The airline staff continued their work, unaware that their morning was about to be completely turned upside down. Because at that moment, a convoy of black cars pulled up outside the airport. Security officers stepped out first, scanning the area. Then, with a quiet but commanding presence, King Charles III stepped onto the pavement. The moment airport security saw him, they straightened up. And inside, the airline employees had no idea what was coming. Until one of them glanced up and went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. The check-in area fell into stunned silence as the King of England himself walked through the automatic doors. By now, Charlotte had taken a seat in a corner of the waiting area. She wasn't crying, she wasn't throwing a tantrum, she just sat there, staring at the floor, her bag resting beside her. Then she heard footsteps. When she looked up, she saw him. King Charles, her grandfather, walking straight toward her. Behind him, a flurry of security officers and frantic airline managers scrambled to keep up. "Charlotte," he said warmly, extending a hand. "Come." She took it immediately, standing up. And in that moment, every staff member who had dismissed her felt their stomachs drop. The realization hit them like a truck. They had just kicked out a princess. The whispers started immediately. Passengers who had witnessed the commotion earlier exchanged glances. "Wait, that was Princess Charlotte?" one man murmured. Another woman, who had originally sided with the staff, now looked horrified. The entire atmosphere shifted in seconds. The same employees who had dismissed Charlotte were now frozen in place, their faces draining of color. One of them, the man who had told her to step aside, gulped audibly. The woman who had first denied her boarding. She looked ready to faint. And when King Charles turned his gaze toward them, they knew they were in trouble. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The staff stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. Your Majesty, we didn't realize..." "You didn't realize that you were speaking to my granddaughter?" Charles interrupted. "The Princess of Wales?" Silence. Charlotte spoke up. "They said I couldn't board because I didn't have my passport." Charles turned back to the employees. "Did she provide a letter of authorization?" The woman nodded quickly. Yes, but That letter was issued by the royal household," Charles said evenly. "It was official documentation, and yet you chose to ignore it." Now the airline manager stepped forward, sweating. "Your Majesty, this was a mistake. We deeply apologize." Charles didn't reply immediately. He looked at Charlotte. "What do you think?" he asked her. The staff held their breath. Charlotte could have said anything. She could have demanded that they be fired. She could have insisted on an official complaint. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at the woman who had turned her away and simply said, "I just wanted to go home." That was the moment it really sank in for the employees. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had embarrassed the royal family. The airline wasted no time. Within minutes, Charlotte was escorted to a private lounge where top executives tripped over themselves to apologize. But the damage had been done. The royal family rarely made public statements about travel mishaps, but this one would not be forgotten so easily. Needless to say, the airline scrambled to fix everything. Charlotte was personally escorted onto a private flight, with staff bending over backward to make her comfortable. They offered her everything from first-class meals to extra blankets, but she barely acknowledged them. The damage was already done. As for the employees involved, well, let's just say their future with the airline wasn't looking great. And the next day, the news had already spread. Airline staff denies boarding to Princess Charlotte. King Charles personally intervenes. Social media exploded with outrage. Memes were made. People couldn't believe that Princess Charlotte had been treated like some random passenger. The airport released a public apology, but the damage control wasn't enough. The story had gone viral, with news channels dissecting every detail. Some defended the airline's strict policies, while others argued that a little common sense would have prevented the disaster. And the lesson? Well, let's just say that the next time a quiet young girl steps up to the check-in counter, the staff will think twice before turning her away. What do you think? Should Charlotte have revealed who she was earlier, or was the staff completely in the wrong? Let us know in the comments section.